Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We are continuing a short series. Well, actually, it's not a short series. It's a 16-part series. Every single Myers-Briggs personality type. We're talking about how each type can show themselves love. And this week, we're tuning into the ISFJ personality type. So if you're an ISFJ or you've got an ISFJ in your life, or you just want to learn more about ISFJs and how they can show themselves love, this is the episode for you because we're going to unpack that today. A couple key things, Antonia, just before we get started. We've been framing this using the cognitive functions of personality. So if you're an ISFJ and you have our personality owner's manual for your personality type, you're going to find a resource in there called the CAR model. It's a metaphor for how your mind is wired, how you learn information, make decisions, your cognition. And your four-letter codes, ISFJ, point to some of the mental processes that your mind is using, your strengths and some of your, more challenging parts or weaknesses. So we're going to reference that today. So you have that owner's manual. Be sure to pull that CAR model diagram out because we're going to follow through, or you can follow through as we go through those positions in your CAR model and talk about how you can access those parts of yourself in order to have a good relationship and show your self-love.
Yeah. So a couple tracks we want to lay down before we get into what you're talking about, Joel, is the philosophy that we're coming from. So if you've listened to the first episode of this series, when we just kind of generally created or laid down what you could call almost like an algorithm of experiencing self-love, the framework or the theory that we're coming from is that we don't earn love from ourselves. We believe that love is freely given. It's not something that we have to earn from ourselves. It's not something that if we don't accomplish certain things, then we throttle it or withhold love. We're actually always trying to show love to ourselves all the time. So the secret isn't accomplishing certain things or being good enough to experience love from ourselves. The key is to remove obstructions that we set up, because we do that all the time for a myriad of reasons.
Yeah.
Like we don't think we deserve it. We think we have to, throttle approval or love for ourselves until we've hit certain benchmarks or until we're good enough.
Or perfect enough.
You got it.
ISFJs might feel that way, right? I got to be perfect before I can be loved, even to show love to myself.
Exactly. Oh, exactly. So that's really what we're going to be looking at is what are ways that an ISFJ doesn't allow themselves to experience self-love, right? Like what are the obstructions they tend to put in their way?
So one of the ways we can look at this too is you've most likely been in a human relationship, right? Whether it's family, friend, or a romantic partnership. And you would listening or watching right now, you'd probably agree with me that love should be freely given. There shouldn't be conditions on the love that you receive from your family, friends, or partner, or the love that you send. It should be freely given, and it is not required of any metric to hit before that's sent. However, we know that as humans that love is free, otherwise it's conditional. There are conditions on the relationship itself, right? Just because love is freely given doesn't mean all relationships are equal and that there's no boundaries or frameworks or agreements in those relationships. So if you're in a good partnership or a relationship with another human, you have spoken and unspoken expectations of what it means to be in relationship with them. And if you hit all those expectations and both partners or both people in the arrangement, whether it's friendship or romantic, feel good, well, that gives an open channel for love to be sent back and forth. But when those expectations and some of those blocks come in the relationship, that's what blocks love. It's not that love has to be earned. It's that the relationship dynamics are sometimes wonky or messed up. So just look at yourself now. Are you in proper relationship with yourself? You're trying to send love, but if there's a discord or disconnect between yourself and between the parts of yourself, that love may not be able to be given or received to the self. So that's what we want to frame this around today, that love is freely given, but there are expectations in relationship, and that also means the relationship with ourselves.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So like we mentioned before, we're always trying to give love to ourselves. So what we're going to talk about is how to set up a healthy relationship and set proper expectations and of what we're capable of. And once those proper expectations are there, just like in a relationship with another person, I'm not going to say human, I'm going to say person.
What's the difference?
Well, you kept saying, you've been in a relationship with a human.
Well, I mean, I guess you could,
as opposed to a cat.
I guess there's maybe an ISFJ listening that's like one of their only relationships with a cat or a dog or some pet.
Aw.
But I was assuming everybody has human relationships.
Yes, I'm sure of it. I
was particularly saying human because there's a communication channel, a verbal communication channel, as well as maybe the emotional one. Now, I guess maybe animals or pets could be part of this.
Right. So I'll just say, when you're in a relationship with another person, which I'm going to assume you know as a human,
Fair enough.
When you're in a relationship with a person, I've completely missed my thought now because now I'm on ISFJs and cats. When you have expectations of that person and they don't meet your expectations,
yeah,
it's really easy to get disappointed. And then you have to ask yourself, well, did I set reasonable expectations? Are the expectations I placed on them, were they the ones that I wanted to see for them and I was living a little idealistically?
Yeah.
Or is it something where they actually could meet those expectations and probably should, and they're not just disappointing me, they're disappointing themselves as well?
Yeah.
So it's not to say when we mention setting good, reasonable expectations, we don't mean low expectations. We mean reasonable ones. And when it comes to ourselves, we have a tendency to have too high of expectations in areas that we might need to set, lower ones. And we might have too low of expectations in areas where we might actually need to set higher standards for ourselves or higher expectations.
Yeah.
And then when we meet those higher expectations, now we don't feel a sense of disappointment in self. In fact, we feel like we rose to the occasion. And then when we set reasonable expectations in areas that we might be a little weaker or struggle or have more uncertainty, then it's okay, because we're not going to come down so hard on ourselves when we realize, well, maybe I'm never just going to be amazing at this thing. And that's okay.
Yeah. So the best way to look at the expectations for the self is to look at the car model I referenced earlier. In case you're driving or on a treadmill or you don't have access to this in front of you right now, again, go to the owner's manual for ISFJs at Personality Hacker, and that resource will be in there. You can also find it on our website if you look up car model. But if you look at that car model, you're going to notice that there's a driver, a co-pilot in the front seat of the car. It's a metaphor for how your mind is wired. And in the back two seats of the car is a 10-year-old and a 3-year-old. So I'm going to really oversimplify this just in case, again, you're on a treadmill or you're driving or you're unable to look at the paper right now visually. You're just hearing my voice. The driver for an ISFJ, the mental process that you use to drive your life, is a process we've nicknamed memory. It's technically called introverted sensing. It's about all of the sensory impressions and understanding of minute changes and the history of how you became who you are and the world became how it is to this point in history and time. And it's tuned to things like tradition. It's really focused on ensuring that there's a preservation of culture and the way we've done things, and ensuring we're all able to sync up together and be part of a functioning society. I think that's really what this champions. That's your driver as an ISFJ. It does way more than that. I'm oversimplifying again for the sake of brevity. Your co-pilot is a process technically called extroverted feeling. Its nickname is harmony. It's about getting needs met. It's about the harmony between people, the interaction, the vibe between, I don't want to say humans now. I'll say persons. I'll say persons. I'm nervous to say humans alone, between people. And this is really all about, understanding the social situation, understanding what the needs of the people around you are. It's very focused on people, and it loves the expression of emotion and the emotions that are interacting in groups and between individuals. So those are the two front seats of your personality car, right? And these are both strengths for you as an ISFJ. Sitting behind the co-pilot is a process that we call the 10-year-old. We've nicknamed it accuracy. Its technical name is introverted thinking. It's all about precision. It's about logic. It's about logical consistency. Sometimes you could even say perfection would be the word I think a lot of ISFJs would use. And again, it's got about the certainty level of a 10-year-old. Again, this process is way more than I'm saying. I'm just broad brushing to give you a sense of it. And then behind the driver sits a mental process that we've called the 3-year-old. We've nicknamed it exploration. Its technical name is extroverted intuition. This is all about external pattern making. It asks the question, what if? It's a lot about you're using your imagination to guess what might happen or take two things that are seemingly unconnected or not connected at all and putting them together and finding the connection between them, making it work, finding something new from two things that are put together. So this basically is the ISFJ's cognition. This is their personality. I broad brushed it. I went really fast. But if you notice just a couple things, first, the two parts of you that are in that front seat, the driver and the co-pilot, these are the best parts of you. These are the parts of you that just light up. They move through the world the best. And this is when you are living from the front seat of your car, you are definitely living life on your terms, and you probably have a pretty good time of it. When you dip back into either one of those functions in the backseat of your car, you may have different results. Let's put it that way. Sometimes you can have good results. It doesn't mean you don't have capacity or desire for these things. You're just not certain about them. You're just not as certain about them as maybe people that have them as strengths.
Yep.
So already you kind of have this bifurcation. You've got like a strong part of your personality, and then you got a part you got to have to accommodate for, mitigate, and manage throughout your experience. And we have a framework here we're going to walk through where you can put different expectations on different parts of this car in your car model. And we think that's the really good way to frame out how to show your self-love.
So setting reasonable expectations for ourselves is calibrating the level expectation to our capacity.
Yeah.
When we go easy on ourselves, just like we mentioned before, if we have expectations for a loved one and we know they can match those expectations, we see it in them and they don't, we have some disappointment in them that that there's more that they can be doing or offering or giving.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing inside of ourselves. If we have high capacity for our talents, right? Like we have parts of ourselves that we were just naturally talented at. If we don't match that talent with skill development, if we leave money on the table, if we don't match high expectations, there's something inside of us, like an inner wisdom, an inner knowing, that's a little disappointed that we're not meeting our potential. By the same token, if we have an area of ourselves that just like we try and we try and we try, and it's just not in the cards for us to be amazing at it. If we set high expectations for those areas, we're just going to be demoralized. We're just going to be constantly frustrated that we can't meet it. So the car model, the driver, the co-pilot, the 10-year-old, and the 3-year-olds, they basically give us a formula for the kind of expectation we should be setting in each of these positions.
Yeah.
So the driver function, it's technically called a dominant. It is our area of highest capacity. So we want to set really high expectations there. The co-pilot function is an area of modest capacity. So we want to set high expectations in that as well. By the time we get to the 10-year-old function, we want to start being reasonable with our expectations because this is an area of uncertainty for us. So even if we're really good at it, we're still always going to feel kind of uncertain about how well we've done. And by the time we get to the 3-year-old function, we need to be very reasonable about our expectations there. We can't beat ourselves up if we're not naturally great at it because it's actually the opposite of our greatest strength. So I think what we should do is go through each one of these positions and talk a little bit about what it looks like when an ISFJ, when an ISFJ sets a calibrated, proper expectation and what it can look like if they really develop those areas. And in doing so, see if we can remove obstructions to experiencing self-love.
Yeah, I think so. Let's talk about that driver of memory, introverted sensing for an ISFJ. Not only if you're an ISFJ, do you have capacity here, like skill capacity, you have a lot of certainty here too. When you're in this part of yourself, when you're coming from this part of your personality and showing up to the world this way, I think you have a lot of certainty. Like, yeah, I'm living from a good part of myself. My cognition is in line. I feel very equipped to approach the world from this part.
Yeah, absolutely. And because the function itself, introverted sensing or memory, is a function that post-processes experiences. And that's why we call it memory. It's because it's referencing something that has already happened. It's referencing something that a person already experienced and now can take their time with it, can really consider its meaning, consider what the right lessons are from it. And it's not just limited to personal experiences. It can also borrow wisdom from other people's experiences. So it gets tapped into this long timeline of one's own history and the history of the people around the user, the history of the culture that they're in. This is why it oftentimes is associated with traditions. It's effectively a function that's very attuned to how the past is the crucible in which we have been forged. And so as a function that has talent, it means that people who have it as a driver function usually do have pretty solid memories. Usually, not sometimes they claim they don't, but I think of that as like the person who's like, my house is a mess, and it's just because they didn't vacuum their way out of the house, right? It's like your house isn't a mess. It's just you have super high standards for it. And so I think usually people with ISFJ preferences have a pretty solid memory. They just think it's faulty for whatever reason. But that said, they usually do have a strong sense of continuity. They are very good at tracking changes over time. This is part of how they become very detail oriented, because they're noticing all the little details of things that have changed or are different than what they expect them to see. This is why they're usually very good at editing and doing things that require, like a focus on detail.
I mean, a great example of that is the series we're recording right now. You and I, Antonia, do not have this as a strength.
Right.
And I'm always worried, like, wait, did we talk about this the same way last week on the show that we're talking about this week? Are we changing it too much? Is it consistent from episode to episode?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm deeply uncertain about that. But
Yeah.
I would say someone with this as a strength, this is kind of what they're tuned into. They notice those differences and those changes and the consistencies.
Yeah. We only understand it in terms of the fact that we're terrible at it.
We're like,
and we're always like questioning, right?
Yeah.
And like, is there a sense of continuity in everything we're doing? I don't know. So what does it look like when an ISFJ has high expectations for themselves, meets those expectations, and then can feel the love that they're trying to send to themselves?
Yeah.
Well, it's a strong sense of personal continuity. It's a sense that their entire life it's almost like it's laid out chapter by chapter, and it's all been building on itself so that they have a sense of purpose, a sense of narrative of where they've come from. I think there's an importance here to not devaluing personal experiences. One of the worst things an ISFJ can do is to act like their past doesn't matter or the things that they've gone through don't really matter, when they undervalue them. And don't see them as a rich source of understanding, a rich source of wisdom. When they go, oh, I haven't really done much, right? And it's kind of a shrug. Remember, you're talking about your grandmother. You would ask her about what it was like when she was growing up, right?
Yeah.
And she would just kind of be like, oh, I don't know. Like it wasn't that important. It's actually extremely important. And for people who have this as a strength, when they devalue their own personal history, they're setting obstructions in front of themselves to receive self-love, because a big part of how they know that they are, like, this is how they build confidence. You build self-confidence by overcoming obstacles and then taking an accounting of it. And it's the introverted sensing or memory function that is the best at that. It's the best at observing yourself having come through something hard and gone, I did that. But when you devalue your own history, when you devalue your own experiences, then you're robbing yourself of earned self-trust, earned self-confidence, all those things that you earned in going through all of these difficult times. It's almost like you're saying, well, that for some reason that didn't matter. And so talent is not enough. It's skill development. The skill has to be ruminating, thinking about those things, really taking an accounting of them, understanding what that meant to you, understanding how it impacted and affected other people. And realizing that even if your life hasn't been a life of a ton of adventure, none of us get through this experience without tribulation. None of us get through an experience of life without challenges. And you have overcome a significant amount of challenges just because you showed up, right? Just because you're a human. So it's really important for people with introverted sensing or memory as a driver function to not undervalue their own personal experiences.
Yeah, that's so important. And so with this capacity, then, are there other things they can have capacity for at the highest levels?
I think acceptance is a major piece of this. Getting very good at accepting themselves, accepting other people, accepting reality, accepting the challenges that they've had to go through. Just kind of making peace with the fact that this is like the reality that they've experienced. There's no way to avoid it because it's already happened, right? So it's like there's a beautiful acceptance that comes along, almost like a philosophical acceptance of life. And that includes, and I think this is the kicker, this is the big one, this is the skill that has to be built on top of the talent, accepting imperfection. realizing that nobody's perfect. Nobody is. And not every ISFJ is afflicted with perfectionism, but most of them start out that way. Most of them deal with a challenge with this. And so it's setting the high expectation for introverted sensing or memory to accept the reality of imperfection.
Yeah.
And recognize if they look around and they're able to have borrowed wisdom, not just their own wisdom, but borrowed wisdom from other people's experiences, they'll realize that nobody's story includes perfection. Zero. There's zero stories that say, I did all of that because I was perfect. And so the skill is to truly, truly, truly accept zero people are perfect, including the self.
Yeah. So let's move over to that co-pilot of extroverted feeling, the technical name. We've nicknamed it harmony. Again, it's that vibe between persons, people. I keep wanting to say humans.
It's okay. Myself. You can say humans at this point.
Now I've got like a complex around saying humans. You made me worry. The vibe between humans, between people.
Rapport, the energetic rapport between people.
But it also has some characteristics about getting needs met, about helping to architect and shape the outer world so people get along and have a good experience. So this is the host part, I think, of an ISFJ, the part that enjoys people, loves to bring people together, loves to support and host and be part of the action of all that dynamism that's happening.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and so we didn't really talk about it for the first function, but I am going to talk about it for the second one and then reference back to the first. So our friend, Dr. John Beebe, in his 8-function model, says that the first and fourth function, that would be the driver and the 3-year-old in the car model, is the axis of relating to self. So when we set high expectations for ourselves in the driver function, that's us proving something to ourselves. When you get to the co-pilot and the 10-year-old, that second and third function, he says that's the axis of relating to others. So we find ourselves having our co-pilot function sort of triggered, or it lights up, it gets aware and gets attuned in the service of other people or when other people show up. He says it's associated with parental energy. So This is our parent function. Whenever anybody needs parenting, this is the function that, no matter what your personality type is, this is the function that pops up and goes, okay, how can I be of service?
The co-pilot position.
That's right. The co-pilot position. So what's interesting is that extroverted feeling or harmony is already kind of a nurturing parental function all by itself, right? And especially in a parent role. Now, one of the big challenges that people with ISFJ preferences have is they feel like they're at everybody's beck and call.
Yeah.
They feel like they don't have a choice. They have to serve. When they see a need, right? When that rapport understanding, what is rapport? But I'm sending you energy and you're sending energy back. And in that rapport, in that energetic interchange, you're going to feel needs that the other person experiences because they're going to be sending it as part of their energetic signature to you. So people who have extroverted feeling or harmony are keenly attuned to the needs of others because it's part of the signature, the energetic signature that's being sent to them when they're in rapport. Does that track?
Yeah. Well, basically what you're saying is extroverted feeling. There's a feeling that you as an ISFJ will pick up on from the other person, even if it's not explicitly stated. You're just kind of getting a sense, oh, they feel this way. They might feel sad. They might feel hungry. They might feel fill in the blank, whatever it is. And because you can feel that extroverted into the world, you're like, I must do something about this.
Right.
I want to solve that for them. I want to help them with that. And people are need machines. Yeah. Like we're constantly sending our emotion signals out, like the moment we wake up and some of us in our sleep. And so this will never be turned off. I think a lot of ISFJs, like, you know, that whole trope where you have a day to yourself, self-care day, where you shut the world out and you just have the bubble bath or the golf game or whatever, you get away from it all and just go indulge yourself. I think that's an attempt to kind of close us off and just have some space from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And especially since it's in a parental role, being a parent, and we've mentioned this in most of the other episodes in the series, being a parent is a pretty thankless job, right? You don't really expect your children to ever thank you. If they do, it's usually because they've had their own kids and they're like, oh, wow, this is really hard. Thanks, mom and dad, for doing this. So when we bring
in their 40s, they'll say that to you.
Yeah, exactly. Towards the end of our life. If we're lucky, right? So because this is already sort of a thankless, or not thankless energy, but it's a responsible energy, that gets associated with a very responsive function of harmony or extroverted feeling. Sometimes ISFJs feel like they are at everybody's beck and call and that they can't ask for anything back, just like a parent doesn't ask for much back from their children. And it can feel like a burden. So it's really important that ISFJs have high expectations for themselves in this function. It's really a key. It's a super important element, is that they make sure that they are building skill on top of talent. So when this function, when harmony or extroverted feeling is unskilled, it looks reactionary. It looks like every need is a need that I have to meet. It looks like people pleasing. It looks like not feeling like you can ever get a break.
Can't speak truth because that'll hurt people's feelings. So you have to keep your truth to yourself. Exactly.
It's poor boundaries. It's not being able to deal with conflict, right? Or not being able to deal with or enter conflict resolution. It's basically handing your power over to other people, and that's a pretty miserable place. And it will definitely create an obstruction to the ISFJ experiencing love for themselves. So it's crucial and imperative that ISFJs set high expectations for building skill on top of talent, which means all the opposite of what I just said. It's not people pleasing. It's reading true needs and then determining whether or not you're the right person to fulfill them. Because just because there's a need there doesn't mean that you're the right person to fill that need. Sometimes you're the wrong person. Sometimes if you fill that need in the other person or the other individual, they won't learn the right lesson. It's actually, you're not doing a kindness for them. You're actually doing a disservice by meeting that need. Other times people ask for more than is good for them. Like they're not creating a sustainable relationship. And harmony or extroverted feeling should have its finger on the pulse of sustainable two-way relationships, not one-way relationships, which then naturally leads to boundaries. It should know, even though I'm in rapport with other people and I'm feeling their energy and they're feeling my energy, there is a distinction between them and myself. And when another person is dealing with some challenges or, that they've got their own thing going on, sometimes we can be of help. And if we can, that might actually feel really good to be of service. But other times we don't have it inside of ourselves. And so if we give out of a place of scarcity or lack, we might have helped solve their problem, but now we're not solving our problem.
Yeah.
And to show self-love with this means we are going to be self-parenting with it. We're going to make sure that we're showing as much consideration to our needs as we are to other people's.
So let me state what I'm hearing you say for the ISFJ, thinking about their co-pilot of harmony. When we say capacity and expectation, you have a ton of expectation for this function. We don't mean turn it on and just give endlessly. What we mean, you can expect yourself to be judicious about when you give and when you don't, and have good, proper boundaries for your life of where you stop and where another person begins. And that is what we're talking about with expectation.
That's
Have
right.
a proper balance of this.
That's right. The expectation isn't around capacity. It's around discernment and discretion.
Yeah.
Right. You need to learn discernment and discretion. There's a difference between being nice to everybody and being truly kind. And kindness means having limits, setting proper limits, creating, again, those sustainable relationships.
Well, and what that does, it sends a signal to yourself, like I can be trusted. Mm-hmm. I know I'm not just going to hand my power over to somebody else. I can trust myself. That's the proper relationship. Great. Now I can receive love. Like it's going to be another channel for you to send and receive love to the self if you know that you've got this and you can trust that you're not just going to hand yourself over.
Yeah. It's actually a leadership function.
Yeah.
Right. It's empathetic leadership.
Yeah.
And so it really actually shouldn't be just handing servitude over to others. At its highest capacity, it's shepherding other people. And so building an awareness that this is how you contribute. All right. It's the parental function. So it's what we give to others. It's what we give to society. So this is how you contribute. And if you're contributing, you definitely will feel self-love, right? Because we all want to be contributors. But leadership, contribution, giving to others, all of these need us to be at a place where we're not where we have some boldness, right? We have some courage. We have courage around how we're going to show up with other people and not just let them take advantage.
Yeah.
That we're going to be willing to experience conflict, because harmony is not the avoidance of conflict. It's the resolution of conflict. It's getting conflict into a place where you can kind of hear like the harmony of all of the instruments playing. It doesn't mean that you pretend that there's never discord. And so that is the expectation. The expectation is I'm going to amp this up. I'm going to build skill so that I'm at a place where I have good boundaries. I'm not people pleasing. I'm not handing my power over. I'm still empathetic. I'm not disconnecting from everyone else. I'm still in rapport, but I know where they end and I begin. And I'm also going to be treating myself in that same way. I'm going to be getting my needs met as well.
We will be right back.
Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships. But what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves, and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the owner's manual for your personality type. In this owner's manual, we cover the basics of your personality, and then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity, because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your owner's manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your owner's manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first, because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com.
Now back to the show.
Okay. For the ISFJ, those two front functions in your car model, driver, co-pilot, those are your strengths. Those have high expectations for good relationship with the self. Let's look at the trouble zones, not the trouble zones, but the more challenging parts. We all have these. For you as an ISFJ, sitting directly behind that co-pilot is a 10-year-old mental process. It doesn't mean it's got the mentality of a 10-year-old, but just has the certainty level of a 10-year-old. So you might have capacity here. You might even build skill here. You might have a career. Like, who knows? You might have to use this part of yourself all the time in your job or your family or whatever. It just means, though, no matter what capacity you build, you'll always have a sense of uncertainty. Am I doing this right? And because it's got about the maturity of a 10-year-old, it's seeking validation from the outer world to know whether you're good or not. And so it can kind of have a proving energy, a desire for head pats. Somebody tell me that I'm doing this well, looking for approval. And that can hijack your sense of self, and it can hijack your relationship with self and put obstacles in place for self-love. So let's talk a little about this. What's the proper expectation for accuracy, introverted thinking, Antonia?
Yeah. So this is the other half of the axis of relating to others. And like you said, it's a less certain function. It's about, we call it the 10-year-old. Dr. John Beebe calls it the eternal child function. And as you mentioned, it usually is seeking validation to know that it's done a good job. So when we're uncertain, we can either just live with uncertainty, we can avoid the thing we're feeling uncertain about, or we can check in with somebody else and go, what do you think? And this is the part of us that is uncertain. The 10-year-old part is the part that's uncertain and goes, what do you think? And like you said, it's kind of seeking some head pats. So introverted thinking or accuracy is a function that wants to be logically consistent and logically congruent. It wants to get to the truth of the matter. It can juggle lots of pieces of information, large amounts of data inside of its mind to be able to hone down to what is the most logical thing, what makes the most sense to me. It also has a critical, it has a critic's bent. It doesn't have to be critical. It's not intending to be personal in its criticism. It's just intending to critique things to ensure that we're not getting away with something that is off, wrong, inaccurate, or imprecise. But because it is uncertain, sometimes that criticism, the criticism of trying to figure out whether or not this thing is right or off or precise, can feel like an inner critical voice. And this happens to ISFJs all the time. This is where the perfectionism comes up, because introverted thinking or accuracy would love for things to be perfect. That's a great goal. Now, when it's a driver or a co-pilot, when it's stronger and it's not associated with uncertainty, when something isn't perfect, it doesn't necessarily beat itself up over it. It goes, okay, well, that's a goal. It's not a reality. But if this is associated with uncertainty and you're looking around for other people to tell you whether or not you've done a good job, you could see how this would lead to a bit of perfectionism, because you don't want to present something to another person unless you've got it right. It's like just right, precise. And then you go, did I do it right? And then everybody around you goes, yeah, you did it perfect. Oh, and that's the head pat, right?
Yeah.
So the expectation that an ISFJ should have is that they're never going to stop feeling uncertain.
Yes.
That's the expectation.
And by the way, just the head pat, looking for that, we're couching it as if we're looking for somebody to say that. For an ISFJ, it might be the Chicago style manual for writing papers. That might be the head pat. They're like, does this match up? And a little bit of that driver as well, right? That introverted sensing or memory, looking for what is the precedent, and then using that accuracy process to ratify or confirm the precedent through accuracy. That part of you that might reference the style guide to ensure that the grammar is correct. That's the approval that you're seeking. So it's not necessarily a person. That's so just to make sure that somebody that's listening right now goes, I don't think I seek people out for that. Well, it might be something like what I just referenced.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Laying the tracks of how it's supposed to be and then seeing if you match up. So again, this is not necessarily about capacity. There's pretty high capacity that ISFJs have with introverted thinking or accuracy. I've known quite a few whip smart ISFJs, like quite a few that are very logical, that have very strong arguments for the things that they think. They have a high capacity in this.
Scientific mind, often too.
You got it. That's right. A very detail oriented, very scientific minds. Exactly. But there's still a little bit of a question mark, right? There's still a little bit of a question mark of whether or not I'm doing this right. So the expectation should be that you're never going to know. You don't get to know whether or not you nailed it. You don't get to ever know whether or not you're doing the exact, precise, accurate thing. There's nothing inside of you that's ever going to tell you that. And the feedback you get from people around you, they're probably going to be impressed when you put your all into something, but it won't necessarily completely sate you. So the number one thing you have to make sure you don't do is you don't flip this in on yourself. You don't become constantly self-critical.
Too late.
Yeah.
I mean, you're an ISFJ listing right now, or you have somebody in your life, it's probably already happening. Mm-hmm. It already happens.
Yeah. So one of the ways that I try to think of it instead of a critic is an auditor. I try to think of introverted thinking or accuracy as an auditor. It's not intended to come in and tell you that you're terrible. It's intended to show you all the ways in which you could improve. And that's valuable information. And it also is the human experience. Just like we mentioned before, introverted sensing or memory is at its peak when it accepts imperfection. And that means it accepts that your inner auditor is always going to find errors inside yourself and outside of yourself, right? And in others. Sometimes this can become very critical of other people, not just of the self. You can find yourself having a very critical spirit because you have this expectation of perfection. And that expectation needs to be neutralized. The reasonable expectation is that you are imperfect. Everything is imperfect. And if it's perfect, it's only perfect for a couple seconds. Right? Like life changes so fast. And it was one of those situations of a broken clock is right twice a day. It's an accident. When things are perfect, it's an accident. It's not because of intention. So reasonable expectations for ISFJs is imperfection.
So are we ready to go on to the 3-year-old, or did you want to mention anything else about accuracy before we do?
I have one more thing to mention about this function. So this is the other side of harmony. So extroverted feeling harmony and introverted thinking accuracy they're a polarity of each other. They're like two sides of the same coin. And they're both the axis of relating to others. So both of these functions come in when we are trying to contribute, for the most part, when we're in a time period of contribution. And that's a part of the reason why ISFJs become perfectionists, is because they're trying to be perfect for others, not so much themselves. They want to make sure that they're showing up as best they possibly can for other people to serve them. So a part of the making peace with imperfection is making peace that you're not going to be able to show up perfect for other people all the time. And they're going to forgive you. It's going to be okay, because that's not their expectation for you. But like a coin that has heads and tails, when one side is up, the other side is naturally down. So when you are in your harmony function, your accuracy function is not going to be as obvious. And when you flip it and accuracy is up, harmony is not going to be as obvious. And you can see this. Harmony or extroverted feeling is very much about rapport and being in a vibe with other people. Whereas introverted thinking or accuracy is, it's the opposite of vibe. It's like just looking at data. It's just looking at the information. It's actually not even in vibe with itself. It has a tendency to disassociate from self. So it's as far away from vibe as you can get. So it's like, how do you use both of these things in service then? Well, as opposed to having that 10-year-old try to serve people with perfection, the better way for it to serve is to serve harmony or extroverted feeling in its desires, its attempts to get people's needs met. And that's a far more certain place. Like, when people have unmet needs, what people need. You're probably very community minded. When that function is strong and vibrant, it's really good at setting good boundaries and really helping people understand. Like, it can be very diplomatic. There are a lot of great things that come along with it. And when introverted thinking or accuracy supports harmony, now it's not just helping people, say, resolve conflicts. It's explaining what's going on in the thought process for each person, right? Like, that thinking process can come up and articulate what's going on. It can help with communicating. Go ahead.
Well, it knows the core beliefs that are causing the discord. You think this, and this other person thinks this. That's why you disagree. You have different beliefs you're starting with. You have different thoughts you have. So if we can think about how we're seeing this, how you're thinking about it, we can create resolution in the situation.
Yep, exactly. So using this function to support extroverted feeling or harmony is kind of like taking that coin, and as opposed to having it flipped one side or the other, it's like spinning it. Yeah. And when you spin a coin, it's spinning so fast you can't see which side is heads or which side is tails. It's almost like it turns into one thing. And Carl Jung called that a transcendent function. When two sides of a polarity work in tandem with each other so beautifully, it's almost like they're one thing. And when an ISFJ does that with these two functions, they're so good at helping people understand the logic of why we need to treat people well. Yeah. When they're community oriented and they're serving other people, they're so good at problem solving and bringing like a technical mind in to relational challenges. And so this helps them very much contribute. They see themselves not as imperfect, like I should be perfect and I should be people pleasing all the time. It's more like, I know how things should be set up in order to get people's needs met. And I'm going to bring a problem solving tinkerer, scientific mind to it to be able to explain the logic and help other people understand this as well. And then I can be in a little bit more of that leadership frame. And that is so confidence building for people with ISFJ preferences. It's really helps them understand their place in everything and how much beauty they bring to situations. And so any obstructions to self-love, that obstruction of people-pleasing, poor boundaries, the obstruction of perfectionism, all of that gets just removed. And instead, they're watching themselves contribute in this gorgeous way. And so all of that love for themselves can just be passed back and forth.
By the way, if you're following along, you're like, wow, there's a lot here. Well, how do I do any of the things you're talking about? Well, hang with us, not just in this episode, but hang with Personality Hacker. I mean, that's what we talk about. How do you make all these things come alive in your life? Obviously, that that owner's manual, ISFJ owner's manual, can help you with a lot of these tactics.
That's a major part of what the owner's manual does.
Exactly.
Is it goes into how each of these functions can be developed.
Yeah. Because there's a bunch of things you can actually do with this. We're just giving the framework for it. And there are actions that you can take. So let's talk about that 3-year-old, that final piece of an ISFJ's personality. We look at this and we call it the 3-year-old. Again, you might have a job where you have to do aspects of this. You might have a life circumstance where you're here. You might have skill built, but you're always going to have the certainty of a 3-year-old in this process. So even if you've got training in this and skill development here, you're going to have deep uncertainty whenever you go here. The mental process for you as an ISFJ in this position, this 3-year-old position, is exploration. Its technical name is extroverted intuition. It's about pattern recognition in real time, using your imagination to ask, well, what if this random thing over here was mixed with this random thing over here? What would come of that? What would be the new spark, the new creative thing? Often people that use this as a strength love to explore and travel and learn new things. And there's a part of you that loves this too as an ISFJ, right? You like learning new things and seeing what's possible and using your imagination to speculate what might be going on. And I mean, sometimes that can be like paranoia if you don't have certainty, right? If you're speculating what happens down the road, that could create anxiety or paranoia. And that uncertainty can enter there. So it really depends on what the subject matter is, where this is in your life and all of that. But there is an expectation that's the proper expectation for self-love. Let's talk about what that is.
Yeah. So this is a function that's oftentimes associated with innovation and rapid change and disruption, which are usually not the favorite things of an ISFJ.
Yeah.
Rapid change, disruption, quick innovation. Though it is, as we talked about with the co-pilot and the 10-year-old, the axis of relating to others. This is the 3-year-old. It's on the other side of the axis of relating to self. So the reason why there's always going to be deep uncertainty here is, unlike the 10-year-old function that also experiences uncertainty, but then can get the outside world to calm it down and go, no, you did an okay job. The 3-year-old cannot, it doesn't accept outer world feedback. When it feels like it's not good at this function, it just feels like it's not good at this function. There's nothing that can be done. There can be a little bit of fatalism around it. So in a world that is rapidly changing and requires us to make intuitive leaps all the time and to adopt technologies at lightning speeds, it can feel like the world is destabilizing, moving too quickly, forgetting about important things in its disruptions. And it can feel like, well, I'm just not made for this world. And it can encourage an ISFJ to diminish, to throttle themselves, to lean back and kind of let life happen outside of them. So there's the expectation is this, that you're never going to feel anything other than deep uncertainty in this function. And we as people take an experience of uncertainty as an automatic red flag, right? If I feel uncertain, that must be that something's wrong. But that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes we feel deep uncertainty and nothing's wrong. I liken it to, like, let's say you had, a job interview like an hour away from where you live, and you were rushing around that morning trying to get ready. Maybe somebody called you or you weren't expecting it, and your whole morning is thrown out of its usual routine. And you get about 55 minutes driving towards that job interview. You're 5 minutes away, and all of a sudden your brain goes, did I leave the iron on? Because you ironed your shirt because you wanted to look nice, right? And your brain just implants this sense of uncertainty. Well, you have two options. You can either drive all the way home, blow your job interview and check. If you can't call anybody, right? If you can call somebody, you call them and check. But if you can't do that, nobody's available. You can either blow through your job interview and go all the way home to check, or you can go, well, I guess I find out when I get home, right? You go to the job interview, and then when you get home, you find out if your house is on fire, right? Or has been burned down. And 999,999 times out of a million, your house is fine. Okay. So that is a situation of deep uncertainty that there was nothing wrong. It was just your brain just popped something up and went like, hey, is that a thing? Right? That's how you feel about this function. It's a place of deep uncertainty. It's a part of your identity. It's a part of how you see yourself, but you're never going to feel comfortable here. It's never going to feel like part of your comfort zone. And that's a challenge because introverted sensing or memory, that driver function, it uses comfort to let itself know that everything's okay. That's a part of the reason why comfort is so appealing to ISFJs and why they're so good at creating comfortable experiences. Because once you know that you're comfortable, you know that all your needs are met and everything's going to be all right. But there's a part of you that is outside of your comfort zone. And a double hit on this, a double whammy, is that the function itself wants to get out of comfort zones. That's what extroverted intuition or exploration does. That's why it's a disruptive process, is because it's always trying to get out of a comfort zone. It's always trying to do something that's innovative and new and is the opposite of comfort. So a function that's already trying to get out of comfort zones is well out of your comfort zone. So it can feel like a double whammy. So the expectation has to be, I am never going to feel totally comfortable here. It is always going to feel uncertain. But that doesn't necessarily mean that something's wrong. And I can expand my comfort zone, or at least my familiarity zone, to include it. Because a part of what you need to have in order to experience self-love is you can't push this away. When we feel uncomfortable or uncertain, we have a tendency to not want to look at the thing that's creating uncertainty. We just put it out of our heads. But we have to integrate it because it's part of our axis of relating to self. So we have to make it a part of who we are. And that's the expectation is you're never going to be amazing at it. It's never going to be something that you feel totally solid in, but you still have to integrate it. You still have to make it a part of your experience.
So let's get more specific. I mean, some of that's really abstract. What would this look like if we have a good expectation, a proper relationship with this part of, an ISFJ has a good relationship with this part of themselves? What are some specifics in that?
Yeah. So this is, as it relates to self, inside every ISFJ is a yearning for adventure, right? There's a yearning for bigger things, a yearning for new experiences and novelty. And when this part of themselves gets integrated, kind of like when we talked about the coin spinning for the co-pilot and the 10-year-old, there's also a version of this for the driver and the 3-year-old. And the coin spinning looks like getting triggered to want to do personal development and growth, a desire to get outside of one's comfort zone and have novel experiences, to do things that might require a little bit of courage. Right? Like it's not going to be comfortable. It's not going to be familiar. It's not going to be what you already know, but it will be something that stretches you, helps you understand more about yourself. It's not life forcing changes upon you. It's you choosing to change, or you choosing the changes or the new experiences that you want to have, so that you can understand more about yourself. Even if those things lead to challenges, there are now new challenges to overcome. And there's also a piece in here around creative problem solving. This is a very creative part, a very imaginative and creative part of an ISFJ. This is also a part that is willing to entertain new ideas and thoughts, and sort of understand, I guess we could do it a different way, can't we? It's the part that sort of enjoys watching people brainstorm and get new ideas from all of that brainstorming. But I think one of the notes that I made is, it's also the part of an ISFJ that can help sell an idea to somebody else. Yeah. So extroverted intuition or exploration has kind of a marketer aspect to it. And we talked about the different styles of intuition in a previous podcast. We talked about marketer extroverted intuition as the function that can get people all juiced up and carbonated for a new idea. And when an ISFJ takes the time to integrate it, they might never become a marketer themselves. They might never really truly get amazing at selling people on ideas, but they can get excited about something and have that excitement be contagious. They can help somebody understand something and get excited about a new way of approaching things. And so all of those help the ISFJ make sure that they're not getting too rigid, too inflexible. This is the part that helps them be more flexible and maybe take a little bit of a philosophical perspective. Like the idea of continuity means if you're really paying attention to the continuity of life, you know that change is inevitable. So it's like understanding that in the long timeline of history, change is part of continuity. Disruption is part of continuity. Being being tuned into the seasons and being tuned into all the different things that have come before means that sometimes those things were disrupted and they needed people to be able to help us get it back on track. So it's an awareness of what needs to change and what needs to stay the same. What needs to be stewarded through all of this. Like it's almost like a bridge of tradition and into progress.
So that's how an ISFJ can have proper expectations to show themselves love. And we talked about the highest capacity at the driver all the way down to the 3-year-old. Let's pivot now, because there's not just ISFJs listening or watching. All of the 15 rest of us types want to look to ISFJs and say, what can we learn about self-love from ISFJs? So as we tune to that and we think in terms of an ISFJ who has the proper expectations for their personality, all 4 functions, is, stretching themselves in the 2 front seat functions. They're expecting a lot and they're mitigating and they're managing the 2 backseat functions of the 10-year-old and 3-year-old. And they have found a way to have good relationship with themselves and send themselves love and receive that from themselves. They're operating life well. What is something that the rest of us can learn from that? What's the lesson here from the ISFJ?
Yeah. So there is a wisdom that comes from an ISFJ that has done this level of growth and development, integrated these parts of themselves, set proper expectations, built a good, solid relationship with them. And in that wisdom comes, or at least the thing that I personally admire, is a capacity for deep joy. It's a capacity to understand the beauty in the simple things of life, a capacity for acceptance. It's a recognition that life isn't always the way that we want it to be. And yet there is still beauty in simplicity. There's beauty in just sort of like in the ordinary. Like life is fleeting and we don't get a lot of time. And introverted sensing or memory, that driver function, it's watching clock, right? It's watching time pass. It's understanding sort of the changes that we all go through. And it's recognizing how much time has actually elapsed. And we don't get endless amounts of time. So can we really appreciate everything we are given? Yeah. Can we really appreciate the beauty in the ordinary, especially since things are so fleeting?
Well, and if you're tuned into the beauty of the ordinary, as an ISFJ, you have the capacity to see inside of yourself and others this nuanced quirkiness, this nuanced uniqueness, this nuanced humanness, if I can use the word human now, Antonia. I'm always worried. But this is a very unique experience. And I think that you're tuned into that. And so I think that also gives a capacity for joy. I don't see all those tiny, tiny nuances like an ISFJ might. My personality it's not wired for that. I see the bigger pictures that like, they're more abstract and they're not detailed, right? They're kind of just broad brush. So I miss a lot of that. When I'm talking to a person, a lot of people seem the same to me because, again, I just broad brush everybody. But I think an ISFJ really is tuned into the micro differences between folks. And I think that does give a capacity for more joyfulness, like the mosaic of humanity, the mosaic of all of us as people. I think they have that capacity. I think that's something that I can learn from them personally. And I think anybody can in that self-love journey.
Yeah. It's an awareness of a contentment in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. That true appreciation it's like joy just effuses when you've got that sort of philosophical awareness about life.
Yeah. Okay. We've done a lot of talking here, unpacking the idea of ISFJs showing themselves love, the expectations. Remember, love is a verb. It is an action that we do. It's not a stance we have. It's something we do. So if you are an ISFJ or you have an ISFJ in your life or any type and you are showing love, well, that means you're doing something. That means you're acting upon that. You're demonstrating to yourself that you love yourself. And I think we gave some access points here in this episode for how to do that. Again, if you want to go further, please come over and get one of the owner's manuals for your personality type. I think that's going to be really helpful for you to unpack some of this car model. And it really gives more specifics on how to do some of the things we recommended.
Yeah. And remember, it's not earned. Love is not earned.
Yeah.
A healthy relationship is, but you are always sending love to yourself. But are you receiving love from yourself? And a healthy relationship with yourself is how you'll receive the love you're already giving.
Yeah. Okay, you haven't had a microphone, but we do want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this episode. You can leave a comment, ask a question. More importantly, share your story. Personal stories are important. I mean, from a memory standpoint and your driver process, if you're an ISFJ, your personal story will show you who you are and how you got here. You can look at all the changes, all the things you've been through in life. If you can come and share that with us, share with us your journey of self-love. Is it hard for you? Do you find yourself in that perfection mode? Or is it easy to get past that and you can really express love and have that proper relationship? What is it showing up for you in whatever part of your personality? Again, come over to personalityhacker.com and make your voice heard.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. Please leave a rating and review for us on iTunes. It's always what's the word? Well, it's always encouraging.
Yeah.
I read all of the reviews, and when we don't get one for a while, I get sad. So go leave a review, and I promise I will read it. You might be watching us on YouTube since we have a video version of this podcast. You can like, subscribe, hit the bell, and leave a comment if you'd like to, as Joel mentioned, share your story or just be part of the conversation. And Joel's already said it. I've already said it, but we really, 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 really believe that the owner's manual, which has been a labor of love for years, honestly, the owner's manual is the best. In our opinion, we poured love into it. We've poured our best content into it. And it really is a place for you to understand how to do the development work that we've been talking about in this episode so that you can remove those obstructions and really form the healthiest relationship with yourself possible. So head over to personalityhacker.com and get a copy of the ISFJ Owner's Manual.
My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.
Hey, it's Joel from Personality Hacker. So a big reason people get into personality types is usually to improve their relationships with other people. And you can understand key differences between you and someone else when you understand how type works. So clearly, personality type is applied to relationships. But what about the relationship with yourself? Well, personality type can also help you navigate your career, or maybe an educational path that you need to follow, or other opportunities that present themselves, and it helps you know which are the right choice for you. And ultimately, personality is the key to unlocking identity-level worldview and life purpose. It all starts with getting the owner's manual for your personality type. In this owner's manual, we cover the basics of your personality. And then we dive a layer deeper to connect your personality to your relationships, your career, your worldview, and identity. Because we believe it's your life, and it should be designed for your personality. So start your owner's manual journey at personalityhacker.com. When you access your owner's manual, I recommend focusing on the ideal day exercise first, because when you start crafting your ideal day, you're being mindful about the type of lifestyle that you want. So designing a life around how you're naturally wired makes sense, and you can finally stop fighting yourself. So come discover and develop your unique personality at personalityhacker.com.